Around 2 years ago, I released a review on a really cool first-person shooter called Descent. I thought it was a pretty solid review when I made it, but looking back after 2 years, I do not think it really held up as much as I thought it would. I think the original video was more of me just explaining the game instead of actually trying to review the game and give it positives and negatives. That isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it certainly is not a review. I hope that this video will cover everything that I didn't cover in the first take. I'd like to really tear these games apart for what they are and explain why I think you should take your time trying it out. So let's not waste any more time and prepare for Descent. Descent has a very tame story, and that doesn't make it a bad game, but when it comes to early 90s first-person shooters, the story isn't the main focus, the gameplay is. That is until Valve's Half-Life decided to show up and throw all the fun out the window. Yeah, I'm not a big Half-Life fan. Anyways, when you start a new game, you are met with a big wall of text. That usually is a turnoff for most people because they can't consume more than 20 words at a given moment without crying. But for the people who can read, our bald-faced friend, who we learn to know as Dravis, briefs us on the mission he is assigning us. Our character, who doesn't have a real name besides Vertigo 1, is a mercenary for the PTMC, Post-Terran Mining Corporation, led by Dravis. Vertigo 1 really dislikes Dravis and the PTMC, and all he wants is his reward money for completing the missions. We learn that PTMC's mines were taken over by their mining mechs who went rogue from a system-wide virus. Not a good look for PTMC, huh? The robot's final destination is Earth, and you have to stop them before that happens. It doesn't actually happen, but that is what you are told. Dravis tells you that the reactors are the weakest point in the mines, so your task is to kill the robots, save any hostages, make your way to the reactor, and blow up the mines and escape safely. You start on the moon and work your way outwards towards Pluto. Even though the story is very simple, the gameplay is what makes the game shine. Descent is a pretty lengthy game, and with 27 levels plus 3 secret levels, it can take the player quite some time to complete it fully. The first time that I played Descent, it took me a little over 6 hours. I don't exactly remember how slow I was going through the levels, but one can complete the game faster or slower than that, and it all depends on the player's skill level. And speaking of skill, Descent offers 5 difficulties, Trainee being the easiest and Insane being the hardest. I have never played on the hardest difficulty because that is way beyond my capabilities, but it is still offered for those people who want to try theirs out. I would personally recommend Trainee for new players because not only is it such a vastly different type of movement, but also that Descent is a really hard game. The upside is that you are given a life system. If you die, you lose a life and respawn at the start of the level. You don't lose all of your items though, they stay where you died so you can go back to collect them. Sometimes it's better to die and recollect your items if your health is extremely low, but it can also be a major hindrance if it is in a really hard location to get to. It takes time to get used to how Descent controls. For the first 5 levels, I used a very specific keyboard layout because keyboard was the only way to play. And even though that sounds like a major turnoff, it technically is doable to play the whole game only with keyboard. During level 6, however, I found out about a source port which allows for mouse and keyboard movement, which makes the experience 10 times better, but more on that later. The 27 jam-packed levels of Descent follow the FPS standard that Doom created, red, blue, and yellow keys. The player has to find all 3, or 2 depending on the level, with the last being the red one, which leads to the reactor. As you fly through the levels trying to collect the keys, you also face a lot of different robots. Some are easier to take care of than others. The worst out of all of them are the Class 1 Drillers and the Super Hulk. These two are the ones that can break your game and kill you in a second. The Drillers are hit-scanning robots who fire at you very quickly if they're in your line of sight, and Hulks fire homing missiles at you that are really difficult to dodge in an open space. Luckily, the game gives the player the weapons that those two robots have as primary and secondary in your arsenal. Primary consists of guns, and secondary consists of explosives like missiles and bombs. The player can use these two, the primary and secondary, however they feel, and they can also do it simultaneously. Throughout the levels, you may or may not find secrets, and this is because some are a bit tough to find. These secrets usually contain goodies for the player, but sometimes they are exits to one of the 3 secret levels. The goodies can range from a bonus life to a shield or an energy boost, power-ups, ammo for the Vulcan, or a weapon, and it might be helpful for the player to keep an eye out for these secrets on harder difficulties like Insane. Another thing the player can look out for is the hostages. They are usually easy to find as they are indicated by green dots on the wireframe auto map and are located behind blastable doors. The hostages don't serve any story purpose, but they do boost your score if you save them all and escape a level without dying. Once the player has wiped out all the robots and collected the red key, they do what Dravis told us in the opening text wall: blow up the reactor. But before you do that, it is a good idea to locate the exit of level because you only have a short amount of time to get out of the mine before it explodes. And exiting the level is one of my favorite sequences in the game. The tune that plays is pretty nice, and it's cool to watch the mine blow up behind you. And that's the formula for Descent. It's a simple one, but it works. As you progress through the game, the levels get more complex. The size of the maps get larger, and the layout of the tunnels start to almost intertwine within themselves, leading to very labyrinthic design, which is a pretty big downside. However, the wireframe automap is there to help try to mitigate that problem. The two boss levels, yes, I know how disappointing that sounds, are levels 7 and 27. They start off just like all the other maps, but instead of a reactor, you have to face off with a really difficult robot. 27's boss is one of the hardest FPS bosses I have ever had to face, besides Descent 3 Helion's Assault Mech, but that's besides the point. The boss's room is so poorly designed, it's just crazy. It's a cramped mess of cubes that the boss can teleport between. Other robots are spawned in and try to kill you on top of the boss bot, launching powerful missiles at you. It's a pretty difficult boss, I'll be honest. But trying to complete the level in one shot is a very grueling task, so good luck to anyone who plays. Descent, just like Doom, Duke Nukem, or any early FPS game, has a killer soundtrack. All of the tracks are beautifully constructed, and each level has its own song. The robots also have their own alert sound, so if you study them hard enough, you can know what you'll be facing before you even see it. And the one you don't ever want to hear sounds like a digitized power drill, and you want to know who it comes from? You bet, the Class 1 Driller. Once you hear it, you're going to want to fly away real fast. Now, going back to what I said before, there is a source port for Descent which makes the experience of playing this classic much better than a DOS. Not only are you given the ability to play it in 1920 by 1080, or a custom resolution of your choosing, but you are also given the ability to use the mouse to aim and shoot. I use this source port called DXX Rebirth, and I highly suggest playing Descent with it, as it is so much cleaner and easier to use than DOS ever was. Now, there is one big issue with Descent that cannot be avoided, and it's that this game can make you very sick very easily. Not everyone is used to 6 degrees of freedom, and just moving around for a level or two can end up with someone having motion sickness. Since there isn't a way around this issue, the only thing to do is take a break every few levels or so. But I personally didn't have this problem, so I can only assume that this is the best option. Besides the motion sickness issue, I honestly think that this game is worth it. For $10 you can have hours of fun trying to beat the game on multiple difficulties, scavenging for secrets, or just playing the user-made levels, and yes, that's a real thing. If you have ever played Doom, Quake, Blood, or any of the 90s first-person shooters, I think that Descent should be the next in line for you. It's obvious the creators had a lot of fun making this revolutionary title, and it is just crafted so well, and it's an extremely robust game. So do you think Descent is worth a try? Well, you can be the judge of that. But what about Descent 2, you may say? Well, why don't we have a look at that one? In the end of the first game, we learn that the virus supposedly attached itself to our ship, and that we are not allowed to return to the PTMC headquarters. Dravis gives Vertigo 1 a rendezvous location, and that is where he goes. Descent 2 continues that story. The moment you launch the game, you are greeted with the cutscene. There are others sprinkled throughout the game, but this opening one gives us the story to Descent 2. Vertigo 1 goes to the rendezvous point, and we learn that Dravis wants him to go to another star system to gather reconnaissance information. Vertigo 1 objects that he fulfilled his contractual obligations, but Dravis denies this and references his contract. If Vertigo 1 fails to do this, he will be found in default of the contract and will be sued. So Vertigo 1 is basically forced to do Dravis' dirty work, which he does, and that leads us into Descent 2. The standalone version of Descent 2 has the same number of levels as Descent 1, 30 in total, but the way it is split up is different. With Descent 2, there are 24 standard levels and then 6 secrets. This may feel like the campaign is shorter, but in reality, it isn't. I feel like the secrets are much easier to find in this game than it is in the first, and because of this, you will most likely be playing more than 24 levels. Descent 2 also took me around the same amount of time it took me to complete Descent 1, which was about 6 hours. And like I previously said, that can all change depending on skill. There is also an expansion to Descent 2 called Vertigo, and this expansion has 20 standard levels and 3 secret levels, and took me around 4 hours to complete. Something the player might notice when completing levels is that they are far easier than they were in the original Descent, and this is with good reason. Many players of the original thought that the game was way too hard and unfair, so the developers made tweaks to the second, which led to a much more enjoyable overall experience. One of the things that the developers did was remove hit-scanning robots. This means that the Class 1 drillers are not present in Descent 2. They also nerfed the Super Hulk who shot homing missiles. There is still a robot who has homing missiles as his weapon, but it is much easier to take out as its health isn't extremely high. You can also take them out much faster because there are 10 new weapons to use at your disposal. My personal favorite of them all is the Gauss Cannon. It acts just like the Vulcan, but is way more powerful. The devs also added in a speed boost called the Afterburner, and it really helps during boss battles when you need to leave the area before you die. However, the most substantial addition to Descent 2 is the Guidebot. Guidebot is a small robot that you can activate at the start of every level to help guide you through the levels and find keys, power-ups, robots, and more. So long gone are the days of aimlessly searching the map to find a certain location, you just have to follow Guidebot instead. But there is one addition to the game that just doesn't really make sense, and it's the Thiefbot. Thiefbot randomly speeds through the levels and can sometimes take items away from you. It can range from a few missiles to one of your primary weapons. Every time I saw the Thiefbot, I would stop what I was originally doing and try to kill it. There's an upside to killing it though. You get your items back, and you can also get some shield and energy bonuses. Descent 2 is also structured completely differently than Descent 1. Instead of having 2 bosses on 2 random levels, Descent 2 has 6 bosses spread every 4 levels. Every set of 4 levels is a different planet system, so the levels seem to follow a type of theme. One of the systems is mostly water and ice based, so the levels follow that style. Although it seems like such a small detail, it leads to a more cohesive narrative. Music plays a significant role in Descent 2's experience as it comes with this very heavy industrial rock Red Book soundtrack. If the player doesn't like the rock, they can turn it off for a simpler but equally enjoyable MIDI soundtrack. However, I feel like the Red Book soundtrack adds a great deal of atmosphere to the game. In addition with the complex level design and crazy robots, the player can literally feel like they are the ones piloting the ship. But piloting the ship also comes with the same problem that is experienced in Descent 1, motion sickness. There is simply no way to avoid it. Ignoring that issue and taking the game for what it is, Descent 2 holds up as a very solid game and it's very fun. Just like the original, a lot of love has gone in to create such an experience. The game is more refined and balanced so the player doesn't feel cheated when they die. This means they can actually enjoy the process of blowing up mines and robots without having to worry so much about losing their progress. Descent 2 is also priced the same as the original, so it's a win-win scenario. With that in mind, if you enjoy a harder game, I think that Descent 1 is more geared for you. But if you want to play a more fair and lengthier game, then Descent 2 is the right choice. And hell, if you really don't give a damn, then buy both and spend some time blowing up reactors and flying through mines. Even though the game still has negatives, I think the positives outweigh them. I still believe, and will always believe, that Descent is a game that everyone should play. The way it controls is so different from any other game that the experience itself is worth your time and money. There is an ending to Descent 2, and it leads directly into the third, but I will probably do another video on Descent 3 as this script has already gotten longer than anything else I have created. Descent 3 is a very interesting and different game. With that out of the way, I hope that I held up to the expectations I originally set out in the introduction of this video. I also hope that you enjoyed this more in-depth review. I'll see you in the next video and have fun preparing for Descent.